What's up, Stranger 9? Good to see you. How you doing? We have another late night short one. Last few days I'm pretty busy, so I'm doing my best to show up before the end of the day. What's up, Chill Pill, April, Retro Root, Liz J. Welcome everybody, Leah, Christine. Welcome everybody. Gonna give it a few more seconds. Welcome to all the newcomers and to the regulars. I'll give an introduction in 2 seconds. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right. Let's see. See today it's mostly TikTok, which is fine. I feel like it's a little bit too late for the other channels. So it's not my regular hours. So welcome everybody. To all the newcomers, this channel mostly revolves around the simulation hypothesis. My name is Danny, and I'm claiming to have found actual proof we live in a simulation. A few years ago I discovered that if you project a diffracted laser on the surface and ingest a particular molecule, you will see code running in surfaces. This observation is now being replicated over 1,000 times worldwide, and I am in conversation with some of the leading researchers in the field, and there's all kinds of opinions on the subject, but it's definitely very interesting because it's 100% replicable. Anybody can do this, and no special skills required aside from, well, setting aside some emotional baggage if we're entering the molecule space. We meet here every single day to discuss religion, spirituality, philosophy, science, and whatever comes to mind. I have slightly long days recently, so I'm trying to show up, and sometimes it's a little late. And today's going to be a pretty short chat. We're maybe going to spend about 30 minutes. If you guys are interested in longer forms of my videos that you can find here on TikTok, you can YouTube channel, which is Dango Thoughts, 3 words, DANGO Thoughts, and there I'm expanding a little bit more about all the topics, as well as I have interviews with a lot of very interesting people, and I have a few very interesting guests coming up actually. So if you give me a follow there, I promise it will not disappoint. The next couple of guests are going to be very fun. How are you, Akil Prawira? Good to see you from Twitch. I'm very happy to see you. I'm very new to Twitch, so whenever I see people from Twitch, I'm extra excited. Welcome, welcome. So once again, one more introduction. This channel revolves mostly around the simulation hypothesis. My name is Danny, and I'm claiming to have found actual proof that we live in a simulation. A few years ago, I discovered that if you project a diffracted laser on a surface, any surface, and you ingest a particular molecule that I cannot name because of legal reasons, you will see code running in surfaces. This observation has now been replicated over 1,000 times worldwide, and this is an ongoing conversation with the scientific and I guess also the spiritual community, even though these are conversations with 2 very different flavors. We're meeting here every single day to discuss the implications, the discovery, the experiment, if anybody wants to ask details, essentially the matrix, yeah, only upside down. Awesome. Well, I'm new to Twitch as well, and we meet here every single day to discuss science, religion, spirituality, philosophy, and whatever comes to mind. And one more reminder, you can go check out my YouTube channel. It's Dango Thoughts, DANGO Thoughts, or you can follow my link tree up here in the description. All that being said, let's dive right in, because today I don't have that much time. Usually we go for about 2 to 3 hours. Recently my chats were a little shorter. because of certain prior commitments. One of the questions is, do you play any musical instruments? No, I wish. Music is truly like magic to me. But I am surrounded by incredible musicians all the time. Can you tell us what it rhymes with? The molecule? You can just Google the spirit molecule, or you already know what it is. I'm stuck in the dryer. Can you come help? Nice. So if you guys have any questions about the experiment, I would love to answer them. If not, I'll dive into something that seems... Let's see what we can cover in about 30 minutes. One of the things that people always ask me, where else do you live? What do you mean by else, Akil? What do you mean aside from the internet? How many languages do I speak? I speak 3 languages. I am saying we live in a simulation, yeah. But it is a very direct question and requires a little bit more of an extrapolation. The claim is not that we... Oh, other app than Twitch, got it. Sorry, I didn't recognize that. The TikTok is Danny Goller, at Danny Goller, DANNYGOLER. Same for Instagram, at, obviously. And X is Goller Danny, but on X I'm also barely existent. I'm relatively new there. So the proposition is not that we live in a computer, but that the world at bottom is computational. And we can discuss what computational means, but it is a higher function that whatever the laws of physics would allow. In fact, it's rendering the laws of physics. So I always say it's kind of like the Matrix upside down. If in the movie The Matrix, we were stuck inside of a software and we're trying to get out to the real world, in reality, the real world is computational, and where we are is a one tiny subset of that larger computational space. And we think of it as the real world, but in fact, it is the not less real, but it is one slice of a much larger reality. I believe we create our own reality. Yeah, we're co-creators of reality. Clearly, you can't walk through a wall, which should give you a hint that you don't create all of reality. And I know some people believe that ultimately we are one mind expressing itself in all the possible ways. I think it's a coherent thought. I think it makes perfect sense. However, I do think that the word me means something, and it refers to a feeling that we have that there's a central agent. Now, obviously, the truth is that ultimately that central agent is more of a kind of like a structure that doesn't really survive scrutiny when you actually look at it. But for all intents and purposes, it does play a role. I guess you can call it the ego, which I usually separated from the word I, because I think of the I as the unified I. In other words, I do believe that my feeling of the I and your feeling of the I are the same in that sense. But there's the whole personality and everything else that feels that is central to what happens to us is not what is controlling the appropriation of, everything. It controls a tiny sliver of it, which is relevant. But again, to test this, try and walk through a wall. You can't. And if you want to say, well, maybe eventually we'll be able to, sure. So then maybe everything is possible, but not everything is possible in any period of time, and not everything is possible in any particular order. In other words, certain things have to happen before certain other things will then be allowed to happen. I hope this makes sense. Because of how we perceive and interact with our existence. I like a mass probability simulation. What do you think happens after death? I have no idea. Idealism, yes. I think idealism is a good starting point, but idealism doesn't put enough of technical elements on the table. I do think Donald Hoffman's model is much more, gives you a little bit more concrete things to play with. But at that point, we probably... Wait, I like mass probability simulation. What do you think happens after death? Probably nothing. Yeah, I think nothing is actually... It's funny because I used to think that very confidently. But the older I get, the more I start to understand that being convinced that nothing happens is literally being convinced you're going to go to heaven. Is equivalent to being convinced you're going to go to heaven. They both have the same amount of weight, considering the fact that we don't really know what the nature of the mind is, or the universe, or anything else. Nothing is so calm and peaceful. Do I meditate? Yes, I meditate all the time, and I've done now nine meditation retreats. Like 10-day silent retreats. Why do you meditate? You know about the mind. And your handle is I'm a moron? Well. So what I wanted to maybe touch on today, maybe we won't be able to fully exfoliate the subject, but we'll give it a little rub. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory, but essentially it's the idea that magic mushrooms essentially were responsible for evolving our prefrontal cortex to a substantial degree. And I wanted to touch on a deeper idea there that nice. How can you do live on more than one app? It's a streaming software. You can do it through many different streaming softwares. I'm using Streamlab at the moment, but you can use quite a few of them. Yep, basically magic mushrooms. 1 second. The general premise is, I think, relatively easy to break down. So I'll take maybe 5 minutes to do that, and then I'll talk about the deeper idea that I wanted to touch on. The idea was that whenever primates first climbed from the trees, so a very long time ago, and thick woods were replaced by savannas, so there was less places to hide. One thing that was in a very available in abundance was wild cows, and magic mushrooms, well, some species grow in the cow poop. And because that was something that was available to play with as part of the new primates diet, they took all kinds of doses of it. Now, it does 3 different things. There's 3 different levels to it. The first level is, if you eat just a little bit of it, your visual acuity goes up, which means that you can probably be a better hunter, and you can find berries, and not to speak of the fact that maybe you also open some other channels that allow you to also communicate with something higher that might tell you where to find certain things. But we'll leave that aside for a second. Even just from the purely physicalist perspective, it is a fact that when you consume these things at a certain quantity, your ability to see clearly visually becomes heightened. So natural selection will favor you. The next stage over, if you take a bigger amount, it does make you more sexually driven, which eventually leads to more reproduction, and also relaxes the whole ego part. So I guess you can think of these tribes as more, kind of the sharing style, which once again will actually make social lubrication much easier, and will make, once again, evolution will favor you. The last step is that if you take copious amounts of it, it will allow you to play with tapestries of meaning that previously you were not interacting with, which will stretch the mind and allow it to evolve to higher degrees, and maybe even allow us to, maybe that's the thing that allowed us to evolve our linguistic abilities. Now, all of this we are playing a game. Yes, I do meditate. Amazing how deep your mind can get. And I'm sure, Faye, as you know, at least according to the Buddha himself, the point is that you're basically supposed to ignore, but not attach yourself to even all of these deeper elements of the mind, which is sometimes very challenging, because you're right, a lot of these things are just amazing. And hello. I'm not sure what was this thing. What I wanted to talk about, all of these things are obviously somewhat coherent, and they might even map onto what we actually understand about the universe at large. and or at least the life on the planet and the time scales that were involved. But what I want to talk about is the potential that these magic mushrooms are actually actual seeds that were scattered across the universe by a much more advanced civilization. Because we know that spores can technically survive the coldness of space, and it's an interesting theory because it makes sense, because spores can survive the coldness of cold and this of space. And what you would do is, instead of trying to search for other life, you would encode a message in the mind space, which probably is a universal thing, and you would just send certain messages within a genetic code that spreads throughout the universe randomly. And whenever it hits a particular planet on which there is life, and eventually there is, advanced life and intelligent life, then only when that life reaches the stage where it can interact with that message, it basically sends a signal back and says, right there, there's somebody right there is paying attention. And then there's an unfoldment. They send somebody to meet and greet, or first investigate, the species that was interacting with the message. And I really believe that that is the portion of history that we find ourselves in. We're actually interacting with that message. Let me see if I see any comments worth answering. That's a good question. The reason I'm saying that is because it's pretty clear to me that what I discovered is not a coincidence. I think the reason that it was available to be discovered, so to speak, in the time that it was, is because this exact point in history allows for that, and we are ready to understand certain things. Now, this is not a simple project and not a simple, prospect, because in order to understand the larger picture of what's going on, you actually have to be of a certain caliber of a species. You have to have certain scruples in place, not just your technological and your intellectual ones, but I guess what you would call spiritual or ethical, the ones that aim towards not just your immediate private goals, and that it would include the immediate private for the species, but also your universal aspirations. And I always like to think of the evolution of human civilization equivalent to the arc of a human life. So if you think of our evolution as one human, I guess you can think of cavemen as toddlers. They're kind of gooing and guying and, throwing stones and falling over their faces. And when we got more advanced, we became like kids. They started protecting their own, this is mine. I guess you would equate this to the agricultural revolution, maybe a little bit before. Then you start getting into your teen years, which I would say is about from the mid-agricultural, like from about 6,000 years ago to about 100 years ago. And about 100 years ago, after we're done with all our craziness, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, we decided, okay, we're becoming young adults. We have to kind of figure out our career. Maybe we understand that maybe you need to clean your room, and you understand why, because it has something to do with your state of mind and how you would be operating in the larger world. And we're ready to leave home and explore and find a new career and find an actual career. So we have to ask ourselves, like, what are we going to be when we depart into the bigger universe? The one thing that is clear to me is there are actual adults kind of observing this whole process and seeing if we are, I guess you can say, worthy, but I think it's the wrong word, if we're ready to be let in on, the deeper understanding. And I think that part of that story is our discovery of the technological elements. Some people, especially from the spiritual community, think that technology is somehow, a negative element. I don't think so. I think technology can be whatever it is that you make it. Technology is just technology. It's an extension of us. It's the ability to yield more change and instantiate more knowledge in the physical world. What kind of knowledge you're going to be instantiating and for what purposes, that's a completely separate question, and it has largely to do with what the species yielding that technology actually aspires to. So I would say that if you consider the fact that if you run the clock forward, and let's give that maybe we don't destroy ourselves, which is a big if, but let's say we don't, it's just a matter of time before, just like when everything you see around you was created in somebody's mind, eventually these mind elements will spill into the entire galaxy and beyond. So quite literally, the type of attitudes that we are evolving on the planet at the moment, the more mature version of these attitudes will be perpetuated and will be spread throughout the galaxy and beyond. So it's actually not that far-fetched to think that quite literally how we talk to each other and how we greet each other translates directly to what the galaxy is going to look like in 2 million years from now. Let's see. There we go. I want to make it very clear to everybody here that everybody are welcome to come and share ideas and ask questions. But if you're just going to waste everybody's time, don't be here. This is not the space. Let's see. I'm going to repeat one more time to all the people that just joining in now, that the reason that I'm doing this live every day, you can watch some of my videos on the subject of my discovery. They're pinned down to the TikTok channel, but you can also watch the full version on you can follow my link tree to my YouTube channel, which is Dango Thoughts, DANGO Thoughts. And what I discovered a few years ago is that if you project a diffracted laser on a surface and you ingest a particular molecule, you will see code running in surfaces. Now, given it's a little late for me, so my energy is not the highest, but I assure you that the observation is quite mind-blowing. It's not something that anybody has ever seen before, even though some people insist that they see code. I assure them when I actually talk to them, it's not quite the same code that they're talking about. If we're animals or something else? Well, we're definitely animals. Let's start there. We're definitely a living thing on the planet, which is the definition of an animal. Well, I guess you can maybe say that insects are not animals, even though I would say they're also animals. I'm just animals as organisms on the planet to me. The code looks kind of like, actually surprisingly similar to the movie. It looks a lot like Japanese katakana, combined with some Hebrew letters and regular numbers from 0 to 5. Now, all of these are approximations. They don't look exactly like these things, but these things are the closest things that it actually looks like. And the amazing thing about it is that anybody can do it and everybody can agree on it. So you can have multiple people sitting in a room looking at the same thing, agreeing what they're looking at, pointing to it, talking about it, describing the properties of it, and so on, which is something that until now was not really, it was unheard of in that space. There were some agreements about particular observations and how they feel, but never something that is that coherent that actually something that is of the flavor of something real like that. Also, by the way, if you want to come on and chat, you are more than welcome to do so. Just drop me a subject matter in the comments, and then I'll pull you up. What was saying? Oh, animals. But I do think that we we are of a more universal informational flavor. So we are, in that sense, we are special, or at least on this planet. Any species that reaches the more universal kind of mind gains this special quality that they can interact with more universal elements that can be agreed upon by species that can be separated by very vast swaths of space and time, which is which is why the comparison between comparing us to ants in comparison to other aliens is actually not an accurate representation, because ants and even all the way to primitive primates, they're not quite the same thing. Like when you start crossing into humans and beyond. Now, we are just in the infancy of this stage, for sure, and some humans haven't crossed that line, but we are starting, and we are the first ones on this planet to do so. The second you start ascending on this scale, you start understanding more and more and more things, but this is the line where you start to understand concepts that can actually interact with much more universal things, which kind of gets you into the, I guess, big boys club, so to speak. Ramona said, Danny, I'm not trying to disrespect you. I'm very interested in listening to your thoughts. Appreciate it. Why would you think that I think that you're trying to disrespect me? Family most of the time is the meanest people ever. Your family is really mean. Where do thoughts come from? I think they're informational. The short answer is I have no idea. The speculation, I would say, is I think thoughts are informational patterns. Well, thoughts are informational patterns for sure. The question is why consciousness is there to experience them. And I do fall in a much more idealism, under the idealistic perspective, that mind is essentially the universe itself. And all the minds inside the universe, they're essentially dissociative boundaries, the kind of bubbles of the larger mind that can perceive themselves and other bubbles from a third person perspective, from an internal first person perspective, because it always has this kind of like vector pointing in kind of element, which is what I guess it's like informational pattern that refer to themselves, but this property of being aware is, I think, actually the fundamental element, the substance out of which everything is made out of. So in that sense, you are definitely not your thoughts, and if you meditate a little bit, you can find out very quickly, but you are the observer in the middle. You are the universal observer that are seeing all the different elements, and you essentially kind of like look in their direction and you give them reality in that way, and then they expand. And the human mind is no different. It's essentially doing the same thing. I also thought maybe we are gods. I mean, depending on how you define gods, of course, but yeah, I think we're starting to play with the possibility of being very rudimentary gods. No thoughts are new. No, I think there's a lot of thoughts that are very new. Instead, a good mind is the universe. Do thoughts have energy or mass? I think thoughts definitely present themselves as energy because they're electrical cracklings in the brain. I'm not sure if they have mass. I think it will be a deeper question of whether computation has mass or informational process has mass. Some physicists would claim that it does, but I think that's actually not the most interesting question, because this question implies that we think that only things that have mass are fundamental or real, and I think at this point there's no reason to believe so, even from the most rigorous physics perspective. So I do think that, again, I have an interview with Melvin Vopson on my channel on YouTube. You can check it out, Dango Thoughts, DANGO Thoughts, and you can look for the interview with Melvin Vopson. He's a physicist from England who discovered what he calls the second law of infodynamics. And in it, he claims that we can devise an experiment that he describes that we can actually measure the weight of information. So some physicists will claim that's possible. I think that's not necessarily the most important question. Thank you, Shaya. I think the most important question is, what is the nature of what's possible, and then we should proceed from there. This is something that quite a few fields at the moment are trying to approach. One of the most novel attempts, I think, is by David Deutsch with constructor theory that he devised together with I forget her first name, Marletta. She was his PhD student, and now she's a leading researcher in the field. You can look it up. It's called constructor theory. And what they're trying to do, they're essentially approaching physics from a completely different perspective. Instead of assuming the fundamental things to be spin, momentum, location, and mass, they look at everything in existence through the goggles of what is possible and what is impossible, and then you deduct from there. You proceed from there. The reason is because even if you have emerging, what we would call emerging properties on the layers that we assume to be fundamental, if the property that arose for any reason serves some kind of a function that is more than the sum of its parts, it is justified to be assumed to be a fundamental truth about what's possible. And it might be the case that certain arrangements that came as arising properties will be of the kind that the universe itself could not have inspected, so to speak. Which means that they're kind of like little surprise that came about from an infinitely evolving process, including maybe some laws of physics, because all laws of physics are regularities that we can't really explain beyond just saying this is just fundamental. But of course, they must have a reason as well. We just don't know it. So in that sense, we don't really know how many more layers beyond what we know to be fundamental there is, maybe infinite. And this is why the claim is that it's a little arbitrary to decide that because of the time and the scale that we find ourselves in the universe, it seems to be extremely anthropocentric and incoherent to think that this must be the best vantage point to decide what is fundamental from. And if you think about it for 2 seconds, you can't argue with that. That's unequivocally true. You can't really, philosophically, you can't really break through that wall. It's just the most ultimate truth you can say, because we always are wrong about everything because of the circumstances we find ourselves in. And when we find out more about the circumstance, we always find out and we go, oh, okay, there's a larger picture. So it's actually kind of funny. And this is something that was voiced by famous scientists. This is not something, I'm necessarily saying for the first time, obviously. But it is funny how when scientists say things like, we're almost there. Almost where? Almost understanding everything? Okay. Yeah, that's not a delusional thought at all. So just because you've kind of nailed down some things neatly within the framework that you yourself devised. So, for example, if you think about it for 2 seconds, there's really no actual reason to assume that measuring spin, momentum, and actual location in space and time are somehow the fundamental element that you should be looking for if you want to understand how things work. It's good for certain things, in like building things and things like that, but there might be technologies that actually rely on a type of a mind. So, for example, if you don't have the kind of a mind that can comprehend a certain function in the universe, it might be the case that even if you climb into a vehicle that is capable of performing that action, let's say a warp drive or something, but it might be that beyond a certain point, unless you can interact with it in your mind, you literally cannot experience that thing. So it's easy to see because with things that are physical. But if the fundamental thing is not physical, then the whole assumption breaks apart. Because it's clear to us that you can't really climb trees unless you have limbs, right? But limbs evolved as part of a neurological system that is doing something that has to do with climbing, and then over time it evolved to be more and more and more advanced. So in other words, it is an expression of a neural network. And what is a neural network if not a mind? It is an expression of what the mind is capable of interacting with. We don't think of it like that. a lot of time because we think of the physical thing as the main thing. But again, it's nowhere written that the physical thing is the fundamental thing. And if it isn't, then you can kind of go one bubble up and say, okay, the physical element is just an expression of this deeper element, which is the mind. And when the mind sees a certain regularity that it thinks it can interact with, it starts kind of building structures around it, and it creates organisms that can perform functions around that regularity. If we have a three-dimensional space, then it builds bodies that can interact in a three-dimensional space. But essentially, you can just say it's just the mind learning how to interact with this particular function. In the same way, there might be a function like warp drive, like for the whole idea of warp drive is to basically fold the space-time in front of you and then release it from the back. So you essentially moving faster than there you go. There's balloons on YouTube. You're essentially moving faster than light, but you're not really, because you're moving, you shortening the path in space-time itself. You're like folding it. So now at the moment we think it's highly theoretical. We know it's technically should be possible because space-time is malleable. We know that. But how exactly you do that, or how do you create the energy that can do this? That's not clear. There's some ideas, but what I'm proposing is that it's possible that the function of that happening to you as an experiencer, just like a monkey can climb a tree, might be dependent on not just you being able to build a vehicle that can do this, which by the way is also an extension of the mind, because it's an extension of an understanding that the mind can instantiate inside of the physical space. It might also depend on the mind's ability to experience that. So the types of experiences you can have, you can think of them as types of limbs. And if the mind is closed to certain kinds of experiences, it cannot experience the warp drive, even if the vehicle can do warp drive. Now I know it sounds a little like, what am I even talking about? But just try and play with this. See if you can look at the informational pattern as the fundamental thing, and then everything you see, computers, bodies, all of it. This is just an expression of types of regularities that the mind learns how to interact with within the space of itself. Okay. Thank you for the gift. I appreciate you. Do you think there is souls, and what is a soul? I think in the context of what I'm saying, a soul would be an informational pattern that survives the different cycles of the regularities of the physical expression. So physical lives, but it's eternal, so it always maintains itself. Do I even know your starseed family? Pass. If something exists, it never did not exist. We don't know that. Therefore, if a thought exists, it never did not exist. So yeah, so the first part of the phrase I don't fully accept. So the universal truth gives rise to its mechanisms. I think that statement is a little bit too general. Who invented the ideas of hell and heaven, and for what reason? Not sure. Maybe it is some kind of part of checks and balances on the higher space. I don't know what he's talking about, but he's pretty majestic about it. Again, guys, if you want to come in and talk, you're more than welcome to do so. Just drop me a subject in the comment section, and I'll pull you up, no problem. Ooh, okay. I hope. Okay. All right. So if you want to come on, no problem. You can keep insisting, but you have to tell me what you want to talk about, and then I can pull you up, no problem. I don't know what. Well, I take it. I'll take it as a compliment, dog water. And by the way, I'm a water dog in Chinese zodiac, so maybe it's a sign. Um. How do I use the laser? You literally, if you go to codeofreality.com, we have a whole protocol and also all the list what you can get on Amazon or Alibaba. It shouldn't cost you more than $50, the whole thing. And you just project it literally on the surface, and you have to ingest the molecule, and you'll see the code. What's up, Kathleen? Good to have you with us. No one does. We have considered a possibility. I believe so. You just said eternal. Which religion you think is the least harmful? I think it's undoubtedly the Zanes, or however you pronounce it. They literally are trying to avoid stepping on bugs, and they drink everything through cheesecloths, not to swallow like tiny bugs. So I'm pretty sure it's them. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Their life are very difficult. All right, so today, like I said, it's gonna have to be a super short one. It saddens me because I always like to go for at least 2 hours, but I do have crazy deadlines in front of me. So if you guys like, usually my chats are much earlier. In the next maybe week or two, they might be in these hours, but usually I go on at about 5 or 6 p.m. Pacific time. But I'm here every single day. So also on YouTube, Dango Thoughts, DANGO Thoughts, X, Goler Danny, and Twitch. I just started, so it's LaserX83. I'm not sure why would you follow me on all of these, but if you feel called, by all means. But definitely TikTok is the one that I'm usually interacting with people the most. Grayson, good to see you. And peace and love to everybody. I hope to see more of you tomorrow. Love you all. Peace. Good night to everybody on Twitch, X, and TikTok, and YouTube.